it's Tessa. Watercolor brushes come in a whole array of different shapes and sizes, but the workhorse for many of us is a round brush. This brush shape is so versatile, allowing you to get extreme details as well as large washes of color, all with a single brush. There are two parts of your brush that are the most important for today's exercise: the tip and the belly. As the name suggests, the tip of the brush is the very end of your bristles. This is the part of your brush that can get the finest details and sharpest edges. I always look for a brush that has a fine tip to allow for the most precise details. The belly of the brush is the part of the bristles further up. This is the part responsible for retaining water, carrying the load of paint to the paper. When you paint with the belly of the brush, you are getting thicker and juicier strokes, with much less control over your edges. When I'm painting, and especially blending, I find myself turning my hand and my paper to accommodate different painting angles. This has turned into something I do on autopilot, but I really wanted to break it down to put into words why and when I prefer using the tip or the belly for different techniques. To start my experiment, I had a watery base layer of paint to 10 different shapes on my paper. Even in this stage, I can feel a difference in what part of my brush is doing the work. When I start my shape, the tip of the brush is easily painting along the edge and making a crisp mark. As I pull my brush across the shape, the belly of the brush loads the paper with paint. Once I reach the opposite side of my shape, it becomes more challenging to get a sharp edge. I have to adjust my hand position to get a more vertical brush angle. Off camera, this is a point where I would rotate my paper to accommodate an easier position for painting with the tip. I'm going to be painting a second layer on all these shapes, following the 5 blending techniques I used in my video painting pumpkins. Instead of 5 shapes, I'm using 10. This is to practice each technique in a different direction, which will utilize different parts of my brush. Towards the center, I will have the most concentrated color. Then, towards the edges of my paper, I'll have the light and watery areas. The first blending technique is wetting the entire area, then charging in thicker paint to one side. I don't see any difference between sides on this one, since this technique relies more on gravity and moisture than on brushwork. The second technique is where I start noticing some differences. On the left side, I start by adding clean water and then pulling my pigment into this wet area. The belly of my brush is what introduces and mixes paint into the wash. Compare it to the right side, where I paint up to the water and use the tip of my brush to blend. On both sides, the transition is pretty soft, but the left side using the belly of the brush is much more gradual, whereas the right side has more abrupt value change. I can see myself using each of these techniques again, depending on how sudden of a color change I need. I'm noticing some similarities in the third technique. This time, on the left is where I get the more sudden value change. I think this is because I'm using the tip of my brush to merge the areas. Since I started on the right side of this shape and moved on to the left, the tip of my brush is what ends up blending these two washes. On the right shape, it's the belly of my brush blending the water into the pigmented wash. For the fourth blending exercise, I'm using clean water to blend out the paint, and avoiding wetting the whole shape. On the left, the tip of my brush is adding new marks and disturbing the paint I just put down. I think the gradation to the first layer is a little smoother, but the painted area started to get a little overworked. On the right side, it was a bit of a challenge pushing the paint out instead of pulling it, but I think the result is a little cleaner. For the final shapes, I'm using a broken edge technique. I start with a dark wash of paint and pull it towards the center. Soon, I start breaking up my strokes, allowing random areas of the first layer to shine through. With this technique, pulling my brush and using the belly to make the shapes gave me a lot more subtlety and random breaks, compared to pushing the brush and making all the marks with the tip. Doing this experiment taught me so much about why I make the decisions I do when moving my paper and holding my brush. In general, I found the belly of the brush does the best work in blending, but the technique I'm using really dictates which direction I should work. If you do this exercise, I promise you will have a much deeper understanding of your own brushes. After doing this with a round brush, I'm excited to try with some of the other brush shapes I have in my studio. Give it a try. I'd love to hear if you make any of your own discoveries. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.